At this point, everybody pretty much knows that any GeForce RTX 3090 graphics card won't really offer good value, if you can even find one to buy, that is. But nevertheless, I know for a fact that there are at least a few of you out there looking to buy or to pre-order one for yourself, because if you put that value aside, the RTX 3090 is currently the fastest graphics card on the market. And now if you follow that logic, anyone that's willing to pay for an RTX 3090 is probably also willing to pay even more for the best version of it. Now, ROG Strix cards have the reputation of being the best out there, and they also carry a price tag to suggest nothing less than that. But unfortunately, I cannot really talk about prices nor availability right now, as you guys know how this launch went from day one with no virtual stock to speak of. But based on the previous Strix cards, I think we can safely assume that this will be one of the most expensive RTX 3090 variants. So let's make this nice and quick and see what you get for all that money. Let's go. This video is brought to you by Seasonic and their Prime Series power supplies. These top quality power supplies are very efficient, they're whisper quiet, extremely reliable, and my go-to choice for most of my test rigs and builds around here. And to make the deal even sweeter, Seasonic wraps it all up in a cozy 12-year-long warranty. Check them out using the links in the description below. In terms of looks, ASUS did not disappoint. I know that looks are very subjective, but I personally think ASUS yet again managed to make their card look very desirable. It's a fairly big 3-slot card, it is heavy, it has a beautiful metal backplate, and it combines that gray-black color scheme that works really well with most motherboards in a really elegant way. It just looks and feels really well put together. Unlike the tough cards, the ROG Strix does have a lot of RGB, but it's actually implemented in a very decent way. It is not too over the top, it's not in your face, but it's definitely more visible than on the 20 series ROG cards. As you would expect from their top-end model, all the usual features are there as well. There's a fan stop mode when the card is in idle or light use, you get the dual BIOS functionality, and you get an extra HDMI 2.1 connection for a total of 2, alongside 3 DisplayPort 1.4 connections. Now you will need 3 8-pin power cables to connect it, and ASUS recommends at least an 850 watt power supply. Now, if you're not going to overclock this card, you should be fine with a good quality 750 watt model, but since you should be able to push this card to 480 watts, an 850 watt power supply is probably smart if you possibly maybe want to try overclocking in the future. Now, when it comes to performance, I will primarily focus on the default OC BIOS, but in the graphs you will see the quiet mode as well, because the main difference is that it runs a little bit quieter because of a higher temperature target. So it doesn't actually change the power limit like you would see on some other cards, making performance very similar between the two. I will also show the result with the power limit set to 122%, which pushes this card to around 420 watts, which is 70 watts over NVIDIA's base TDP, and that is something you can easily do yourself in the software without really manually overclocking. Now, in its default BIOS, the Strix ends up with the second highest clock speed average of 1957 MHz, which is well above the card spec. It's second only to the Palette Gamer card, which has a very high 420 watt power limit by default. But when you raise the power limit of the Strix card, it will also get closer to that 2 GHz mark. Now, memory speeds are the same for all of these cards, meaning that none of these have their memory overclocked in the factory. In actual benchmarks, the ROG card does take the lead with the highest TimeSpy score, and it's at the top of the chart when testing games. Now, the only real problem here is that the difference between the fastest and the slowest card is so small that you won't actually be able to tell the difference while just playing games. Now, the variance is easily a frame or two only, so even though this card is consistently a bit better, it still doesn't really mean that much. You can also see that when I raise the power limit with the average TimeSpy and Far Cry score actually dropping a tiny bit. And Shadow of the Tomb Raider is one of the few games where you see a little bit of a benefit, but again, I would say it's too small to notice it. So if you ask me, none of these performance differences really justify spending more on a premium RTX over an MSRP one. But let's check thermal and noise results. ASUS default profile focuses on winning the core temperature graphs as it targets a very comfortable 63 degrees Celsius. Now, if you consider how powerful the 3090 is, that's actually a really low temperature. And while managing that, it does end up being a bit louder than the MSI Gaming X Trio, for example. Now, it is far from loud, giving off only a little fan breeze during gaming, but you can hear it a bit. The Gigabyte card runs similarly cool but slightly louder. MSI is quieter but warmer, and the palette runs a bit warmer and a bit louder. Now, obviously, if you prefer your card to run a bit quieter, you can, just change it to the quiet BIOS instead, and you will still get completely reasonable temperatures and, end up with one of the more silent 3090 cards. So I would say very nice results both ways. If I normalize the fans to 40 decibels to compare temperatures at a similar noise level, we can see that ASUS really outperforms the palette, being just ahead of the Gigabyte card and just behind the MSI Gaming X Trio card. Now, that might not sound too impressive for ASUS, but you do have to remember that this card is doing that with a higher power limit and higher power consumption, which also generates more heat. So it is fair to say that the ASUS cooler design is probably still the most efficient out of the bunch. But in general, aside from a very poor availability right now, I can actually see two problems for the RTX 3090 here. So the first one is that the 3090 just doesn't look good compared to a 3080 for gamers, because as I said in my 3090 review, 10 to 12% performance increase for more than double the price is just impossible to justify, making the 3090 only viable for anyone with so much money to spend that you just don't care about value, or for a very specific line of work where you really need a GPU with so much memory. And if that is you, awesome, it is really great that this card exists. But for the rest of us, the 3080 still hits that sweet balance much better. The second one is that with NVIDIA's built-in boost feature and very limited real-world gains from higher power limits, it is just really hard to make any card stand out in terms of gaming performance. So the ROG card does look good compared to others, but none of the cards I tested are bad, and you quickly end up with the conclusion that, you might as well just buy whichever card you can, or whichever is the cheapest, or whichever has the looks or the features that you really want. It doesn't matter. These high power limits will only benefit people that are looking into, extreme or competitive overclocking, in my opinion. So, what does that mean for this Strix RTX 3090, knowing that it will be more expensive than most others? So in terms of features, it is really good. It has all the usual ones. It has dual BIOS, an extra HDMI port. It has a fan stop feature. The performance is great as well. It runs really cool. It is fairly quiet. It is really efficient, and there is a lot of room for overclocking. But those features can be found on cheaper cards as well. And once you're gaming, you probably won't tell the difference between this more expensive ROG card and any of the alternatives that are closer to the MSRP. So the reasonable thing here would be to just go for the cheaper one, right? But remember, we are talking about an RTX 3090 after all, which isn't reasonable to begin with. So if you already decided to spend a fortune on a 3090, I cannot really disagree if you want to spend even more to get the Strix one. It looks and it feels exceptionally well built, which has always been the focus of high-end ROG cards. So if you do get one for yourself, you'll definitely get that premium product that matches its premium price. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and to click that bell to never miss an upload. See you in the next one, guys. Bye!